Buzău, Romania. December 31, 1988. The city is a skeleton of gray concrete, frozen solid under a layer of black ice that glints like a serrated blade. In the final years of a brutal regime, hope is a luxury no one can afford. While the rest of the world cheers for the coming year, a shadow is detaching itself from the rusted walls of a worker's dormitory. His name is Grigore Uruc. He isn't holding a glass of champagne to toast to the future, his hand is buried deep in his coat pocket, clutching a sharpened, industrial blade. He stands in the pitch-black shadows of a stairwell, a place where the flickering streetlights don't reach. The air is so cold it burns the lungs, smelling of coal smoke and fear. As the clock strikes 12 and the first makeshift fireworks explode in the sky, the city erupts in a desperate joy. But their thunderous noise serves a darker purpose. It drowns out a much smaller, sharper sound, the sudden, wet gasp of a victim who never saw the shadow move. For Uruc, the new year didn't bring hope or a fresh start, it brought the beginning of a cold, bloody ritual that would paralyze a nation. He is the hunter who uses the celebration as a mask. This is the Well of Monsters. Grigore Uruc was born in 1952 in the dusty, forgotten village of etched. In the aftermath of a devastating war and under the tightening grip of a new ideology, his childhood was not one of warmth, but of a freezing, hollow neglect. He grew up in a household where poverty wasn't just a condition, it was the only constant, a suffocating blanket that dampened every joy. His parents were ghosts in his life, consumed by the brutal rhythm of survival, leaving Grigore to raise himself in the dirt of the Moldavian plains. As a young boy, Grigore was unnaturally small, silent, and retreated so deeply into himself that he seemed to disappear. While the other children of the village played in the golden dust of the streets shouting and fighting, Grigore stayed on the periphery. He watched. He was a shadow even then, a quiet, unblinking observer of a world that didn't seem to have a seat at the table for him. There was no single grand tragedy to point to, no sudden trauma that broke him. Instead, it was a slow, eroding loneliness, a drip feed of isolation that began to warp his developing mind. In that silence, the boy didn't learn how to love or connect, he learned how to envy and how to wait. He grew up feeling like a ghost, and eventually, he would decide that the only way to feel alive was to make others feel the coldness of death. In the narrow, dusty world of etched, Grigore became a master of a terrifying art, the art of being ignored. To the other children, he was a ghost in their peripheral vision, a boy they labeled as strange, slow, or dim-witted. They didn't bully him with intensity, they simply erased him from their games. The adults, hardened by their own struggles, barely looked twice at the small, scrawny boy who never made a sound. He didn't have friends to share secrets with, instead, he cultivated a private gallery of targets for his simmering, quiet resentment. As he drifted into his teenage years, Grigore's darkness didn't manifest in typical rebellion. He didn't shout, he didn't steal, and he didn't break windows. Instead, he became a blank slate, a person so devoid of defining features that you could walk past him 1,000 times on a crowded street and never remember his face. He was the ultimate wallflower, a man with no shadow. But behind that blank, hollow stare, a predatory hunger for power was beginning to gnaw at his soul. He realized that while the world didn't see him, he saw everything. He began to understand that his invisibility was not a weakness, but a lethal advantage. He wasn't waiting for a place in society, he was waiting for the moment when the invisible boy would finally make the world scream his name in the dark. Then came the heavy, iron hand of mandatory military service. For most young men, the army was a place of forced brotherhood, a chaotic rite of passage. But for Grigore Uruc, the barracks were not a social experience, they were a laboratory of violence. While others struggled with the grueling drills, Uruc thrived in the silence of the night watch. He became a ghost in a green uniform. He learned the geometry of a strike, the lethal physics of how to move without a sound, and the tactical patience of staying invisible in the dark. The rigid, unforgiving discipline of the military didn't fix his broken mind, instead, it gave his inner darkness a terrifying structure. He found a strange, erotic comfort in the cold efficiency of a blade. He would spend hours cleaning and sharpening his bayonet, obsessed with the way the steel could slice through the air with a hiss. He wasn't learning to defend a country, he was learning to deconstruct a human being. By the time he handed back his uniform, the shy, slow boy from the village was gone. In his place stood a disciplined predator who had outgrown the dusty streets of Tsintesht. He didn't return home to the farm and the silence of the plains. He wanted a larger, denser hunting ground. He wanted a city where thousands of souls lived behind thin walls, unaware that a soldier of the shadows had just been discharged into their midst. Uruc moved to the industrial heart of Buzău, a city defined by the relentless hum of factories and the soot-stained sky of the late communist era. He found a place to exist, but not to live, in a bleak, gray workers' dormitory, a concrete hive of thin walls, communal kitchens, and shared misery. By day, he was a ghost in the machinery, a nameless laborer scrubbed in industrial grease and coal soot, his identity swallowed by the roar of the factory floor. He was the man you stood next to at the canteen but never looked in the eye. But as night fell and he retreated to his narrow, iron bed, the blank man began to fracture. The silence of the dormitory wasn't a refuge, it was an incubator for a deep, predatory sickness. His mind, once structured by military discipline, was now deteriorating into a dark obsession. He didn't seek the company of his fellow workers in the local bars or parks. Instead, he began to stalk the city's infrastructure. He would spend hours leaning against concrete pillars or sitting on cold park benches, not for rest, but to study the flow of his prey. He observed the shift changes, the shortcuts through the unlit alleys, and the exact moment when a person became isolated from the herd. The laborer was gone, in his place sat a creature of cold calculation, looking for the perfect gap in the city's defenses to make his first strike. His first recorded crime didn't just break the law, it shattered the soul of the city. It was New Year's Eve, 1988, a night when Romania was supposed to be looking toward a new beginning. Instead, for a 14-year-old girl named Cosmina, it was the end of everything. She was walking home through the thick, muffling snow, her breath visible in the freezing air, her mind likely filled with the small joys of the holiday. She didn't know that she was being watched by a predator who had spent his entire life learning how to be invisible. Uruc was waiting in the absolute darkness of a concrete passage. He didn't move like a man, he moved with the logic of the farm he had absorbed in Tsintesht, the cold understanding that a living thing is just a source of protein, and the precision of the soldier he had mastered in the barracks. He struck from the shadows with a silence that was more terrifying than a scream. His industrial blade, sharpened to a surgical edge, found its mark with a sickening, effortless ease. He didn't want her money, he didn't want to hear her voice. He stood there, a shadow against the dim, flickering yellow of the streetlights, simply watching as the warmth of life drained into the white snow. As the city erupted in the distant sound of fireworks and cheers, Uruc wiped his blade and walked back to his dormitory. He moved through the crowds like a ghost, a blank man among thousands, leaving behind a city in a frenzy of terror and a family broken forever. The midnight killer had officially arrived. Success is a dangerous drug for a killer like Uruc. Year after year, he struck with the same surgical coldness, exactly as the clock hit midnight, turning the city's celebration into his personal harvest. He became the Midnight Killer, a spectral myth that paralyzed Buzău every December. But by December 31, 1991, his luck, and his precision, finally ran out. His target was a young woman named Camelia. Perhaps Uruc had grown overconfident, perhaps the darkness wasn't as deep as he thought. When he struck, the logic of the farm failed him. Camelia didn't go down silently. She fought back with a primal ferocity that shattered Uruc's mechanical calm. The struggle was loud, chaotic, and desperate, a cacophony of scuffling boots and muffled screams that echoed through the frozen air. Panicked for the first time in his life, Uruc finished his grim work and fled into the night, but the city had changed. The snow, which for years had been his faithful cover, hiding his movements and dampening his steps, became his ultimate betrayer. As he retreated toward the safety of his dormitory, convinced he was still the invisible ghost of Buzău, he left behind a trail of deep, jagged imprints in the fresh, white powder. He didn't know that behind him, the hunters were finally waking up, and the invisible man was leaving a map straight to his door. The investigators didn't arrive with a grand theory, they arrived with a strange, heavy piece of evidence, a white plaster cast of a boot print found in the fresh snow near Camelia's body. It was a unique, industrial tread, the kind issued only to specific factory workers in the city's gray belly. The police began a systematic, room-by-room sweep of the workers' dormitories, a massive dragnet designed to catch a ghost. When the officers reached the door of room number 24, they expected a struggle, a scream, or a plea for mercy. Instead, they found Grigore Uruc sitting on his narrow iron bed, as calm and motionless as a statue. He didn't run. He didn't blink. The officers looked down at the floor, and there they were, the heavy, rubber boots, still damp from the melted New Year's snow. The tread matched the plaster cast perfectly, down to the last microscopic serration. But the true horror lay tucked away in a small drawer. When they searched his room, they found the blade, a cold, industrial knife that still held the dried, dark secrets of his victims. Under interrogation, the blank man didn't show remorse, he showed a chilling, technical honesty. Grigore Uruc was sentenced to death for his crimes. In May 1994, he was led to a wall in the Jilava prison, the last serial killer in Romania to ever face a firing squad. As the shots echoed through the prison yard, the shadow that had haunted Buzău for years was finally erased by a wall of lead. Grigore Uruc proved a terrifying truth that many refuse to accept: darkness doesn't need a complex plan, a brilliant mind, or a grand motive. It only needs a moment of absolute silence, the cover of a celebration, and a sharp, industrial edge. He was the blank man, the nameless laborer, the ghost in the machine that no one bothered to notice until the snow turned red. His story is a chilling reminder that the person standing next to you in the dark might not be waiting for the new year, they might be waiting for you. If you want to keep descending into the dark corners of the human soul and unmask the monsters that live in the shadows of history, subscribe and ring the bell. We are always watching, digging through the silt of the past to find what lies beneath. Take care of yourselves, watch the shadows, and see you at the bottom of the well.